Welcome everyone. Today we're going to present two real-world attacks showcasing two incident investigation activities conducted by Team Axon on Hunters customers. I'm Shachar Vaknin, Field CTO at Hunters. I have around a decade of security research experience, mostly around IR and threat hunting. I've led Team Axon for the past 3 years. Now I'm acting as Hunters Field CTO.
Hi guys, my name is Jonathan. I'm 26-year-old security researcher from Israel. I have around 7 years of experience in cybersecurity in the private and the public sectors. And today I'm leading Team Axon, which is one of the threat research team here at Hunters. We are mainly focusing on researching new attack surfaces and investigating threats that maybe bypass the security solutions that our customers have. So today I'm going to speak about adversary tactics in the cloud, lesson learned from recent AWS attack that we investigated at a team. So the agenda is very quick. We start with briefly discussing about cloud attacks, delving into the AWS incident, and at the end speaking about threat hunting and detection ideas that you can take to your organization and implement for to stay on top of those threats. So let's briefly speak about cloud incidents. So cloud attacks have doubled themselves year over year in the recent years. And one of the interesting notes that we took from this increase is that adversaries actually become more cloud focused. So threat actors are not just compromising someone else's computer as it was in the past. They now understand cloud very well, understand how cloud services works, and also how IAM works, and leveraging that to conduct better and more successful cloud attacks. Now, despite the increase in cloud attacks, there is still not enough threat brief publications on the actual attacks that published to the community. And this is leave the community and the practitioners in the security operations without any details about how an attack looks like. And this is kind of take me to the next question, which is, what are the TTPs that adversaries leveraging today in real-world AWS incidents? And how we can take those in order to become better and protect our organizations in the best way. So let's delve straight into it. Let's delve straight into an AWS attack that we investigated in Team Axon and extract TTPs from those incidents in order to share with the community insights from the Frontlines. So before I get started, a quick incident overview. So the attack was discovered as part of Team Axon incident response engagement during 2024. The incident was, according to our analysis, with the objective of accessing cloud resourcing, stealing data, and then also performing coin mining activity. Now, very interestingly, in this case, the attacker was able to remain in the network for more than 2 weeks before the initial response of the organization, either because of detections, lack of detections, and notifications to the team. And an insecure coding design allowed the actor to regain access to the network over 3 times during our response engagement. We will speak about it later in the presentation, but it's very interesting insight that we observed that this actor performed. Now, this is a quick attack diagram about what happened. So you can see that it starts with the attacker that stealing access keys. At this point, we still didn't know how he did it, but we will speak about, I will give a bit of spoiler that we will going to speak about it in the end of the presentation. But we can see here that the actor took 2 different paths. One is compromising lots of EC2s as part of the old approach of adversaries to compromise the known Windows or Linux machines that they know how to work with. And the second path is compromising the IAM and actually moving laterally to the AWS console and also to perform persistency mechanism, such as creating Lambda functions, which we're going to speak as well in this session. So the attack was starting with get caller identity from suspicious IP characteristics. For those who do not know, get caller identity is kind of the known classic who am I command on AWS. And attackers really like it because they mostly do not know what access key they are compromising, and they want to understand, first of all, what is the organization, but also what is the ARN that they just compromised. What is the ARN that's associated with the access key? A few interesting things to observe when you're investigating suspicious get caller identity request is, first of all, looking for access keys that beginning with AKIA, which are long-term credentials and have much more potential to get compromised than temporary credentials. Also, it's interesting to observe AWS region, which, according to our research, there is very interesting detection opportunity if the attacker wasn't configured the profile as the legitimate users that using the access key, which is something that we can assume that will happen in a real attack. Now, the second step that the actor conduct is to connecting to lots of EC2 instances in a short period of time. Now, CloudTrail does not provide log to the actual SSH or RDP sessions that conducted, because they basically do not provide this visibility, but there are two different API calls that you can use in your investigations or for detection that can help you with mapping at least some of the activity. So the first thing is start session API, which is under the SSM service, and basically for creating remote sessions and remote commands via SSM. Rather than CloudTrail, you can also use forensic artifacts under the execution of Amazon SSM agent exit process in case that you have visibility for process creation activity. Another API call is the start instance API, which is basically for start stopped EC2 instance. Now, please take a note that in case that the instance was already booted, this auditing won't be exist. So take a note on those blind spots. Now, in the next step, the attacker was able to take the access key and moving laterally to the console, and basically did it with a very interesting method that involved invoking get federation token API in order to obtain a set of temporary security credentials. Please know that the user must have the get federation token role inside the policy. And after having those temporary security credential pair, the actor can call the get session token API in order to generate a packet that able to log into the AWS console without MFA, because it basically the token that he will receive back basically will be after the authentication was conducted. So in this case, MFA won't be required, and the actor will be able to access to the AWS console itself. Now, the next step that the attacker did is to basically creating persistency using Lambda function. Lambda function is a very common service in AWS for a serverless function. And you can basically, and in this case, the actor was basically creating a Lambda function using the create function API call. And this malicious Lambda function was able to create SSH key and attach it to an EC2 server that allowed him to basically have a persistency mechanism that can allow him to access the machine over and over again. Please take a note that this was created using the AWS console from the federated session token that we discussed in the previous step, but it can also be created from the AWS CLI as well. I guess it was more convenience for him to use the AWS console, but just take this note. Now, one of the very interesting forensic questions that we had is how we understand what action the Lambda function performed and distinguish between legitimate activity of Lambda functions that obviously any organization, probably most of the organization have, and the malicious Lambda function. So please know that CloudTrail, first of all, does not provide details into the code, so we couldn't just look into what the code performed because we didn't have an access to it. And also the action made by Lambda also performed by AWS. So legitimate user agent and IP belongs to the AWS, to the Amazon subnet, so we can't just know what are the characteristics of the attacker. So we basically found that we can take a look on the function name from the the Lambda create function that we see previously, and comparing it to the user identity principal ID attribute after the column. So after the column, you will have the ID and then the function that performed the action. Joining between those two can give you exactly what action the Lambda function that you want to investigate perform. Now let's have midterm status about what we know so far. So at this point, we fully understood the attack path and the techniques that the actor was used. We are able to rotate the entire EC2 instances, clean them, rebuild them in some cases that we wasn't sure, and also removing all the persistency methods that the actor used, for example, the SSH key, the Lambda function, etc. We also was able to rotate the entire access keys that the actor was able to compromise, but we still didn't know what is the initial access. So how the actor was able to, in the first place, put his hands on the compromised access keys. So long story short, we found out that it was attached to public GitLab repo that was belonging to the organization, and the actor was able to retrieve the plain text access keys and secrets from there. Now the thing is that although the team was fully remediated all of the compromised AWS resources, the attacker was still managed to regain access to the network. And if that's not enough, we also saw that newly created access keys that we created after the investigation was also be able to compromise. And after investigating it for more time, we was able to find that insecure coding design allowed the actor to regain access to the network over and over again. It was basically an automatic GitHub Actions mechanism that pushed plaintext access to new commits every time, and with that, the actor was able to just monitor the repo and steal the access keys over and over again, which will allow him to gain an access 3 different times over the incident response engagement. Now, I promise you guys I will give you some threat hunting and detection opportunities ideas. So here I have 5, which from our analysis, we see very common today, right? This incident was just one for many that we see here at Hunters. And those are the TTPs that we really see that actors are actually using in the wild. So the first thing is a suspicious get caller identity that invoke from unusual characteristics. We see that any AWS incident that starts with compromised access keys, starting with this API call. So please make sure that you put the right focus and the right detection logic to detect it. We also see a lot of suspicious login using Get Federation Token API. It appears that threat actors really like to actually log into the AWS console and convert the access key to AWS token. We also see a lot of usage of SSM, of executing remote commands using SSM. So in this case, you can spot suspicious command execution using AWS SSM agent. It can also be based on endpoint logs because apparently AWS put masking of all of the relevant attributes in the CloudTrail auditing. So you can use the EDR logs or Procron logs to detect it using the AWS SSM binary. Also suspicious Lambda function creation, as we saw in this incident, it was used for creating a persistency mechanism, and large number of connection to instances that is very unlikely to see. It's very unlikely to see more than 10 connection to instances over a very short amount of minutes. So all of those is very important to keep you guys on top of the common threats in AWS attacks. We will also publish a blog post regarding all of those and how you can really detect them and practically hunting for them in the Hunters blog, hopefully very soon. And this is for me. I will pass the mic to Shahar, which will give you a very interesting incident that we had this time on premises. Take it off.
So thank you very much, Jonathan, for the insightful presentation. Super interesting. Now I'm going to talk about an attack, a real-time attack our incident response team investigated in real time in one of our customers' environment and prevented a ransomware deployment on the organization. So let's dive into the attack. So our story starts with an alert in Hunter's platform, an alert that was generated by the EDR on the customer's environment that alerting on some attacker tooling activity on the internal network of the environment. And the EDR alerts that some malicious tools was detected, but the activity was prevented and the process was killed. The analyst started to investigate the activity and understand a bit more what's happened, and encountered this story and several more detections on the platform that are correlated together, both on the same device and on other devices in the same network and in the same area of the compromised initial endpoint. On that moment, the analyst understood that there's some kind of a wider attack on the network, and he escalated the activity to us, to Team Axon, to further investigate the attack and understand more what we see here. So on the first few hours, we started mapping the network and understand what we have here and what to put our focus on. So we have the internal network and the DMZ network that are both separated by a firewall. On the internal network, some of the devices were covered with CrowdStrike EDR, and we started seeing alerts that are generated on these devices, followed by connections from the DMZ network into the internal network. We started seeing, as we proceed with our investigation, we started seeing more and more alerts on EDR-covered devices at the time of the investigation. So it was like kind of a cat and mouse game with the attacker. And while we investigated, we started seeing more and more connections from the DMZ network into the internal environment, also to devices which were not covered by EDR, which of course made us more concerned. A bit after the starting of the investigation, we started also seeing Cobalt Strike Beacon C2 activities, both on the internal network and the DMZ network. So we started diving into one of the endpoints to understand a bit more about the attacker techniques and the characteristics and the IOCs of the attack in order to adapt our response to this kind of situation. What we saw there is a malicious service running on one of the endpoints, remote login from the DMZ inside the internal network, credential access and dump attempts, and a lot of PowerShell activity, suspicious PowerShell activity. We started diving into the PowerShell commands to understand better what we see here, and we see this obfuscated command. After a bit of deobfuscation, we understood that there is a gzip file that's written to the disk. The gzip contained another file, another PowerShell file, which is much more robust and much less obfuscated. That was the actual payload of the attack. We started diving into the code and analyzing it to understand what was the attacker purpose in this activity. We used CyberChef, of course, and a tool called Cobalt Strike Parser to extract the config of the payload that we saw on the environment. It turned out to be a Cobalt Strike beacon that was downloaded by the PowerShell script and installed on the device. We extracted the config of the beacon in order to get more IOCs, scan more devices in the environment, and that way expanding our blast radius and understanding which devices are compromised. We saw several more Cobalt Strike beacons active in the same environment that was implemented at the time we are conducting our investigation. So let's dive into the techniques that the attacker used. We've seen some SMB remoting activity. SMB remoting is a known PowerShell CMD that's used for executing commands on remote machines over SMB. On the victim's machine, we saw service creation, payload delivery over SMB, and SMB name pipes that were used for communication with the attacker machine. This was followed by Cobalt Strike payload download. The attacker tried several ways in order to implant the Cobalt Strike, because some of them were blocked by the EDR. We saw he was tried direct execution, memory injection, and also masquerading his DLL as XLS files. And on the devices he did install his malicious Cobalt Strike beacon, he tried to perform secrets dump and DCSync in order to compromise the domain and spread his malicious ransomware. Luckily, the last step and some of the Cobalt Strike implementations were prevented and blocked by the EDR, so the attacker couldn't get a complete foothold of the domain and employ his malicious ransomware. So what we have until now, so we stopped all the access to the internal network. The attack is now contained within the DMZ network, and there's no actual business organizational impact. But we still don't know what's the root cause, where did the attacker got his first foothold within the network, and the attacker is still active within the DMZ. After mapping the entire attack and understanding the attack magnitude, we came to a conclusion that we had 6 different C2 servers, 37 compromised machines, both in the DMZ and the internal network, and 35 compromised users, including domain and local administrators. So we want to understand how the attacker could get his hands on this kind of a huge volume of sensitive entities in the environment. So we started analyzing the firewall that separates between the two networks. The FortiGate firewalls, we started analyzing the NAT logs, because all we've seen from the internal networks are the external, are the NAT IP of the firewall itself. We started analyzing the NAT logs to understand what was the source within the TMZ of the entire attack. And we came into conclusion the attack was originated from 2 Citrix servers. We started diving into the Citrix servers and analyzing the artifacts that we had in order to understand more what's going on there. On the Citrix servers, there was no EDR installed. They were with old versions, both Windows and Citrix, old versions. And the Windows security event log was minimal, because the default size that's configured for the security event log is relatively small, and on active servers such as Citrix, we see that this kind of event log is cycled really, really fast. So we couldn't have a lot of time to look back on the activity, and specifically on the logins to the device from the external network. We started analyzing the activity from the artifacts that we had, mostly Windows event logs and Citrix logs, and we've seen a lot of connections from malicious IPs that either we've seen them inside the environment, inside the internal network, and also IPs that were known as malicious in threat intelligence sources. We started correlating different threat intelligence sources that we use, and we've seen that by that time there was a really large campaign exploiting Citrix servers that was tightly connected to the activity that we've seen in our environment. Now, in order to overcome the quickly cycled Windows security event logs, we utilize different event log, specifically event ID 119, in order to figure out which user logged in which time to the device. This event specifically is a system event logs, which indicates that a scheduled task was triggered because of a logon of a user to the device. Now, by correlating this event log with the Citrix log, we could understand which user logged in from which IP over a much longer time frame. After analyzing all of this activity and understanding a bit more what we are seeing there, we came into conclusion that there was exploitation of the renowned Citrix bleed, a vulnerability in Citrix that allowed an external attacker, to steal access tokens of users that were logged on to the Citrix. And apparently that's how the attacker could have his hand on this kind of a huge volume of credentials of users within the organization. So after investigating the attack, we wanted to attribute this activity to threat actor. We started from VirusTotal graph, super useful tool in order to correlate attacks and understand more about the actor and other entities and servers that are standing behind them. We saw there on the community notes on one of the CobbleStrike C2 domains that it was observed in another malicious activity in another organizational attack, and it was tied back then to Black Basta ransomware group. Along with that, there was a threat intelligence report that was published a bit before we started investigating our attack by the incident response of the Hive team about the threat advisory that was almost identical to what we saw in our environment in terms of the techniques, the IOCs, the characteristics of the attacker and the entire attack. And we also used Twitter in order to see if there's any other mentions to the C2s and the domains that we've seen in the environment. And we've seen several tweets, including this one, which contained exactly the domains and the IPs that we've seen that were used as C2 servers for the CobbleStrike that we've seen in our environment. With connecting all of this intel and a few more other sources and also news that were published at this time, we came into conclusion that behind of this attack, the group that's standing behind it is Black Basta ransomware group, which at that time conducted the very wide attacks, exploiting Citrix bleed and deploying ransomware on many organizations. And with a quick response and good communication with the security team of the customer, we were able to prevent it in their environment. So let's recap what we had here. So the attack timeline, we started from initial access by exploiting Citrix bleed. It was executed around of a week before the domain takeover, the domain takeover attempt that we've seen in the environment. After the initial access utilizing Citrix bleed, 3 days later, while the attacker collecting a lot of different credentials, the attacker put his hand on domain admin credentials and started laterally move within the environment. A bit after that, we've started seeing command and control activity of the CobbleStrike beacons that were downloaded by the attacker on the machines. And around the same day, the attacker tried to laterally move to the domain controller in the internal network and take over the entire domain and deploy his ransomware, which was blocked by the EDR, luckily. Some of the investigation steps that were conducted, and I wanted to highlight when we started investigating the activity and the data sources that were used during the attack. So we started from containment, of course, of the activity. When initially it was detected by the EDR on one of the endpoints, CrowdStrike logs and data source helped us to contain the activity and understand more about the last step of the attacker. Then we started diving into the endpoint, utilizing Windows event logs and CrowdStrike in order to understand what's going on the compromised endpoints. We utilized CrowdStrike, Windows event logs, and Fortinet to understand the blast radius of the attack, and of course Citrix and Windows event logs on the Citrix logs on the Citrix servers in order to understand the initial access vector. So, few key takeaways of what we can do better in order to improve ourselves for our next engagement. First of all, no blind spots. Collect logs from everywhere. You'll never know when you need them, and by the time that when you don't collect them, the time it takes to extract them from the data sources when the incidents happens can take a lot of time and waste a lot of time, allowing the attacker to proceed with his malicious intents. Install EDRs. The EDR was super effective in this case, but we see it also in other cases. EDRs make attackers' life much harder. Know early and patch quickly. Always monitor and respond to new vulnerability disclosures and understand how it can impact you. Things we did very well, the data consolidation and correlation between different data sources to understand the full picture, the creative thinking of using non-traditional event logs in order to overcome our short cycle in Windows event logs, processes and communications between the incident investigation team within Hunters and the security team of the customer, and connecting the dots. Threat hunting in AR requires quick and smart correlation of evidence. Every time we see a lot of different evidence and we need to tie them all to get a full picture of the activity. Try always to understand how these all breadcrumbs connect together in order to get a full picture and full timeline of the attack. So that's it, everybody. Thank you very much and hope you found it useful.